Yeah, 100%. And a good example of that is, again, going back to the loft, like, in the actual airplane, say you're at 45,000 feet, going Mach whatever, and you're at the point where you need to engage, you need to loft, and you need to do all the things you need to do to get that simulated AMRAAM off the rail. But, you're thinking of 100 other things as well, like, what's my airspeed? Am I in the wing rock? Like, do I have the energy to aggressively pull to the loft I want to pull? Is the ASC circle centered? Like, so there's 1,000 other things you're thinking about, and almost subconsciously, your healthy fear of death sense in the airplane is potentially can prevent you from getting that pristine, perfect, loft angle, because you're in the wing rock, or you're not at the energy state that you should have been at that point, and so some of that kind of takes over. So 100% Prime, I agree with you on that one.
For decades, Falcon BMS was a Viper world. That is starting to change. In real combat, the F-15C Eagle has never lost to an air-to-air engagement, 104-0. Now, the Eagle is in Falcon BMS. For many years, everyone's favorite twin-engine fighter had the avionics and DNA of a Viper, but had the looks of an Eagle. Not anymore. With the new arrival of Falcon BMS full-fidelity F-15C, the Eagle finally gets a digital home worthy of its legacy. Today, we're talking to our guest who knows exactly what it is to fly this beast. He spent years flying the real Eagle in the Air Force, and now he is back in the cockpit, mastering it in the virtual skies of BMS. If this is your first time listening, welcome. I have many more episodes talking about Falcon BMS, DCS, and aviation in general on YouTube and Spotify. Just search the simulated airspace. Glad to have you here, and enjoy the episode. Welcome back to the simulated airspace. I am Prime, also known as Aviation Plus on YouTube. I create DCS Falcon BMS tutorial videos for all experience types. And I'm here as always with Fiscus.
Hey everyone, I'm Fiscus. Happy to be along here as ever. I am a small YouTube content creator, a channel called Fiscus Fighties. And I would like to present our guest, Saint, who, like Prime just said, is a real-life Eagle pilot, our first combat pilot we've had, or we're going to have in the simulated airspace. So yeah, thanks for coming along, Saint.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me. I'm Saint. I flew F-15Cs for the Air National Guard from 2014 when I graduated the B course through 2023. Been in the military since 2003-ish as a maintainer. Before that, working on A's, B's, C's, and D's. And just happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, glad to have you. So you did enlist, and then you transitioned over into the Eagle pilot world. How did that, in a general sense, how did that work, or how did that change your perspective on maintainers when you went to when you commissioned to being a pilot?
Yeah, it's interesting because the National Guard's a very unique subset of the military, the Air Force specifically. So I spent 8-ish years, 7 to 8 years as a maintainer. Went to basic training with some guys that essentially stayed in the Guard all the way through my time flying even ended. So guys that I went to basic training with, after I commissioned and started flying the Eagle, were still working maintenance, and it was a great opportunity to be able to build that relationship between ops and maintenance and work really closely with those guys. So it offered a really good kind of perspective broadening experience to be able to go from, enlisted airman maintainer to, mission commander pilot in the F-15, and just the Guard's a really tight knit group, so it was a really great opportunity.
Yeah, that is definitely a avenue, or a way to go for the Air Force, going from maintainer to pilot. Did you see any of your? I guess you did see some of your friends that were maintaining. Do you have any crew chiefs maintain your jet when you were in the B course, or is that where they were, or no?
Not in the B course, but once I got back to the squadron, I mean, guys, again, that I went through basic training and tech school with were still, working maintenance when I got back. So, I mean, the godfather of our first kid is still in the Guard, still working on F-15s, and it was great to be able to work with those guys essentially that I grew up with from a very young age, and then take that to the next level as a commissioned officer in the same unit. and still work with them. So the Guard's just such a unique and valuable experience for folks who are interested in aviation, especially with that opportunity to be able to, learn the airplane and then get an opportunity to commission with the same unit and then fly it. It's just, you can't find that anywhere else.
With you being a maintainer, you already knew mostly about the airplane when it comes to maintenance. So did that help you being a pilot? I mean, that have to learn emergency procedures. You have to know the general how the aircraft works in general as a pilot. But as a maintainer, you really know the details and how the aircraft actually works. Did that help you out in your training for the Eagle?
It's funny because you would expect that it would kind of give you a leg up, but I remember the first time at Klamath Falls sitting in like the simulator, and I had sat in the cockpit, hundreds of times before as a avionics technician, and worked with the systems and stuff, but you really don't understand what the systems are there for until you actually get into the actual employment of them. So yeah, I knew what the ICCP was, or the NCI panel was, or some of the various components. I knew the boxes under the panels and what they did, but actually taking those from like a theory based knowledge to like actual employment was a whole different level. So it was nice because I kind of knew the systems in it, but once you're actually out flying it, it was a whole different ball game. So there was a little bit of an assist there, but overall it wasn't like totally groundbreaking or anything.
That makes sense because you can understand how it works, but you don't understand how it's operationally used. So you know how it works, but you don't know how it's really used because you're not in the air flying with the radar on. It's mostly just on the ground, making sure that doesn't give you any fault codes and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, perfect example is like, an RWR system or the Link 16 system. It's like, as a maintainer, you're like, well, does it work? Yeah, it says it works based on the built-in test function. But then when you're actually using the system, you're like, hey, man, it's working, but it's not really working correctly. And so it's just a little bit more, it's like another layer on top of it, aside from like, hey, is the system working versus can we use it to employ? It's definitely, that just adds another layer of knowledge on top of just the basic systems knowledge.
That's good stuff. That's a very, very unique perspective on both sides of the pilot world and then the maintainer world. So we've both flown together a few times, maybe more than a few times in BMS, flying with the Eagle. What kind of got you into the Eagle when you come from flying the Eagle in real life to getting it into BMS? Kind of give a short general synopsis of how you went from flying the Eagle in real life to flying the Eagle in BMS.
Yeah, so great question. So I had actually had some experience with flight sims prior to commissioning and getting into military aviation. It'd always been kind of a passion of mine. So throughout college, I'd messed around with, Falcon 4.0 way back in the day in the early 2000s, and BMS, Open Falcon, that kind of thing. And then as soon as I commissioned and started kind of focusing on like, hey, this is my focus for the next 10 years, I kind of just, everything kind of fell out from flight simming. I didn't really wasn't involved in it, didn't really have the time for it, or even really the desire to kind of mess around with it. And then the genesis was essentially when I stopped flying the Eagle and transitioned to a different role in the Guard. There was kind of that itch still, like, hey, man, I kind of miss this, and not being connected to the community, and like just the basic flying and fighter stuff, which everybody who's listening to this podcast, I'm sure, is a big fan of. So right when I stopped flying, a buddy of mine who I had signed with years and years ago was like, hey man, there's essentially a full fidelity F-15C that's being developed and released for BMS. Like, hey, you should check it out. And just on a whim, I installed it, got a VR system, put on the VR system, jumped in the pit, and I was like, oh my goodness, like I'm right back there. And so it kind of just took off from there, and just I was really fortunate to discover the BMS community and kind of chat with some of the guys who were developing the F-15C, and just the dedication and passion they have for the airplane really kind of just pulled me back in.
That's a great story, wanting to scratch that itch again, because I know you missed it after you stopped flying. And you're like, oh, what's the second best thing? Is probably simulators, and the F-15C in BMS is the full fidelity simulator of the Eagle, and it's a very good representation of what the Eagle is. So let's talk about the history of the Eagle. Let's kind of see why it was brought up. So why it was created. So basically, in the Vietnam era, the kill ratios were catastrophic when it comes to the F4, and the Air Force seemed to went 2-to-1 or worse because fighters were optimized for nukes, not dogfights. So the Phantoms were optimized for nukes. So even in my experience, I have the F4 in DCS, and I fly around with it sometimes. You need 2 people in it, by the way. The Eagle, you only need 1 for the C model at least. So I've noticed just in the experience I have in DCS is if you're flying around in a Phantom and you fly past a MiG, like a MiG-19 or a MiG-15, you're not going to be able to turn with them. You're just not going to, because it has the aerodynamics of like a refrigerator, so you're not going to be able to even turn with it. So the tactic back then was to fly past it and try to get some space to use the Sparrow and actually shoot on it. So with that being said, there was no airplane in the Air Force inventory to be able to fight something in a close dogfighting regime. So that's why the F-15C was born. One of the reasons why it was born, but mostly it was because the F4 was unable to do dogfighting. Also, later on, we'll talk about later on, the MiG-25 Foxbat. So if you've seen the MiG-25 Foxbat, that's one of the other reasons why it came to be. But those are pretty much the 2 reasons why it came to be in the 1970s and even 60s to be created as an airplane.
Yeah, and let's not forget, there's that whole storyline back in the day of, Boyd with the I forget if it was the ADF, the Air Defense Fighter or whatever, F-16 kind of came about from that. They wanted, just some heat, some sidewinders and a gun, and that's the cheap, high performance platform to do a turning dogfight type scenario. And the F-15, when the A's first came out, they were worried about, we need a large, powerful platform with a big radar to be able to get up, get high, get fast, and intercept those Soviet bombers as well. I don't want to say it was almost an afterthought that it ended up being a maneuverable and very capable BFM platform. But yeah, that Foxbat example is on the money right there. I mean, they were worried about that and they wanted something to counter it. And the 2 prongs of that are A, the MiGs were not as good as they thought they were, and B, the Eagle ended up being way better than they expected it was going to be at the end stages.
Yeah, and like you said, the Foxbat, it was so the CIA actually estimated of it being a super maneuverable, and we know now that is not the case at all. So back then they thought it was super maneuverable, so that's why they created the F-15, and it turned out it wasn't. And as you said, the capabilities of it farly outpaced everyone else, so it was a air dominance fighter right off the bat because they were expecting for the enemy fighters to have more capabilities. But it turned out good in the F-15 and Boeing's United States way to make a very formidable fighter even to this day. So the first flight was 1972, so over 50 years old, and it's still being used. If not being, it's being upgraded. Maybe not the original F-15Cs or A's, but they're definitely upgrading with the EX and the Saudi Arabia one. So there's definitely being upgraded. At least the frame of it is still being used today.
Oh, and I got to throw out, you mentioned Boeing in there, but hey, I'm an Eagle guy, so let's give some credit to McDonnell Douglas.
Fair. Yep.
As
Yep. Yep. They did buy each other, so I mean they're still there. Yeah. Yep, definitely. So some of the records it has a lot of records. As all of us know, it has 2 engines that could just in BMS and DCS you go at 40,000 feet going Mach 1 point bananas, and that's what it's for. So there was some records that it was made. So during testing, the YF-15A, it was dubbed the Streak Eagle. So it was stripped of its radar, military equipment to set a world time record to climb. It rocketed from the ground to 98,000 feet in just 3 minutes and 27 seconds. So imagine you're in the cockpit and you're going really fast and you shoot up in 3.5 minutes. You're already at 98,000 feet. you could probably see the curvature of the Earth, something the Earth is round, and I couldn't imagine doing that in real life. It's never been done before, so they're doing something for the first time. Usually around 60,000 feet, it starts to be kind of, you need a spacesuit. So that's some crazy feat that the Eagle did, even way back then.
Man, I've been up to 50,000 feet, and let me tell you, it gets dark up there, and it's real high. Now think about doubling that to 98,000 feet, essentially.
98.
Oh my goodness, I can't even imagine.
I don't
Kind of
know.
like the edge of space or something, isn't it?
It is I mean, it is basically the edge of
Oh, it's
space.
dark. It's gotta be dark up there.
So the Kármán line is 62 miles. So if we do some math in there, but it's definitely not space, but it's getting close up there. As you said, it was dark, so the sky starts to get black. And do you see, like, what else type of stuff happens at least 50,000 feet?
I mean, I'll tell you, between 40 and 50,000 feet, there's a drastic shift, and the biggest like noticeable factor is the sky color. Like it goes from kind of the standard blue, like we're used to seeing in airlines, to it gets dark pretty quick. And so you're right up at the alleged service ceiling of 50,000 feet, and it's like a pretty dark blue. It's a little unnerving the first time you go up there. It's
Oh,
like, man, this is well, I wasn't 100% prepared for this, but
yeah,
yeah, so I can't even imagine 98,000 feet. That's crazy. I've heard some anecdotal stories of some of the older A model guys, like, oh yeah, I went up to 75,000 feet just to see if I could, and blah blah blah. And so that's, I mean, I put credit there because they probably did. It's definitely capable of it for sure.
yeah.
Wow, 75,000. I can't even.
Yeah.
I don't think I've even went past 40,000 in BMS, let alone real life.
Yeah, I wonder what safety precautions they have. Like when you went to 50,000 feet, I'm guessing there wasn't anything crazy because you just went up there one day. But do you know of the
Yeah,
safety precautions
50,000
for
is
60,000 higher?
so these older guys from the A models, they just,
Yeah, did it?
regulations be damned kind
Yep.
of thing. But yeah, above 50,000 feet, like essentially you start getting into that area where, like, if you have a decompression or something like that, you kind of want to be in a pressure suit. So and there's the that standard line that they have, and it varies based on where you're at and everything. But 50,000 was essentially like, we're not going to go above that. So above that, per the regulations, like, you're going to need pressure suits and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, but basically space. It's super cold, no oxygen. Yeah, you're not gonna make it for very long. And if
yeah.
you have to eject, you're gonna be in the parachute for more than you could probably hold your breath up there. So yeah, even back then they were trying to make more a more capable F-15C. They converted a two-seat F-15B into the first Strike Eagle demonstrator in 1980. So this was unbeknownst to anyone. So McDonnell Douglas and Hughes Aircraft did that. So they secretly funded it, did an air-ground study, and they were trying to make the Strike Eagle in, like, basically in secret. So they converted that F-15B with two seats, and that actual or that feat that they did back then, it actually paved the way for the F-15E Strike Eagle. So the Strike Eagle was not really a mistake, but it was a secret thing they were trying to make. Even though when they were making the F-15C, they said they didn't want any air to ground for it. So not a pound for air to ground. They didn't want it to be air to ground at all. But it turned out the F-15 was one of the best air to ground airframes to date with the F-15E Strike Eagle.
Yeah, it turns out when you have a platform that's as big as a tennis court with two massive motors, and all the power you could ever want, it's a very versatile platform. And I'm sure we'll get into it later, but you see that even today with the EX and the advent of hypersonic munitions, and you need an airplane that's big, has potentially two seats if you need the wingman drones, all that kind of stuff that's coming up. So I mean, that platform was absolutely ahead of its time when it was developed, and it's just the logical step forward to make a multi-role F-15 with a Wizzo in the back seat doing weaponeering. I mean, a fantastic platform for it.
Yep, great. I wonder if BMS will get it. I know DCS has it, and there's some drama behind that. But that's just a platform you could use. It's good for air to air if you wanted to use air to air. You have another person in the back seat. You got the air to ground capabilities that are just completely immaculate. So it's a very well-rounded fighter. Also, it has, well, the F-16 Viper is a well-rounded fighter, but It doesn't have the fuel for staying around much for much long. So that's another thing with the Eagle. It has a lot more fuel in it than the 16.
And a bunch more of hard points than the Viper can carry.
Yes, the radar is bigger. Like it's just there's certain things where it like just dominates completely. And the air-to-air record, everybody says it. I was in Massachusetts at the museum, and there's a airplane there that they moved it there from the Massachusetts Air National Guard, and the tail number they changed it, but it's 104-0. They put it on the tail of it saying that it's the Eagle is 104-0, so it's never been shot down in a specific air-to-air regime. So the ratio air-to-air is 104-0, which is completely crazy.
Yeah.
In air-to-air stuff. I think the F4, the upgrade or the from it upgraded from the F4. I think it was 3-1, maybe 2-1. So about every other F4 was shot down air-to-air wise, and probably mixed in some air-to-ground in there or surface-to-air missiles in there as well. But it definitely didn't have the same air-to-air record as the Eagle has. But let's go back into Saint's brain and kind of pick his brain a little bit more. So we just now learned a little bit about the history of the Eagle. When you were growing up and getting your wings for the Eagle, did it change how you thought flying it? Like it was brought up from the F4, it was a air dominance fighter. Did any of those things kind of have a mindset change for you, how to utilize the Eagle, or did they kind of just teach you all that, or did it help you out when it comes to the tactics of the Eagle?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I don't think changed is really the correct word. I mean, I grew up as a maintainer on the A's and B's, and then when we transitioned to the C's, so kind of the Eagle, the single seat Eagle, what role was always kind of internalized to me kind of early on. We sat an alert mission at the guard unit, and air to ground was never something we ever talked about. So it wasn't necessarily like a change in how I thought about the F-15. But once getting into the cockpit and learning to fly it, the whole, not a pound for air to ground kind of became like a real thing, because you could tell almost everything inside of that airplane, the design and the upgrade decisions that were made as the C model progressed were made with like one goal, and that was like air to air lethality, just full stop. And that came at the expense often of other systems, pilot, aircraft interface, ergonomics, and creature comforts. It's funny, you talk to, I flew with a bunch of guys who flew the Hornet, the E model, all that, and they get over and like, what do you mean there's no parking brake? Oh, no, you got to wedge your toes in there and hold the brakes because they didn't put a parking brake in it. There's no, autopilot. What is that? Okay, well, the C model has, axis hold, which doesn't work very well, and a very rudimentary altitude hold. That's it. There are no GPS points. There's INS, lat longs. That's it. So you can tell the money that was put into the eventually the C model in its development and upgrade path was 100% focused on lethality. So that not a pound for air to ground, it carried through and will have carried through up until the end of the C model service life.
With the F-15C being undefeated air to air, does that legacy follow pilots into the cockpit? I know there's probably some type of like pride in the F-15C's air-to-air ratio. Is that kind of like what you saw when you were going up and actually flying missions with the F-15C?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a legacy that is taught and honored from essentially the first day of the B course all the way through guys who go through the weapon school course. I don't want to say to like almost a comedic level, because it is, it's a record and it's a serious topic when you talk to Eagle drivers about it. But every single Eagle driver knows the WGASF slogan, the world's greatest air superiority fighter, and it's not just lip service that's being paid to it. Every young Eagle wingman is essentially given the talk, air quotes here, which is don't be the guy that breaks the 104-0 streak. And it's a very salient point when you're trying to teach a new wingman who, maybe isn't taking something seriously or is wondering why, the debrief is getting so focused on something that seems very minute at the current time, but it's something that we take seriously. It's an honor, and it's something that everybody wants to hold dearly and not to be the one to mess up that 104 to 0 record.
I have a quick question. Does the F-15C, when it was upgraded, or even the A, does it even have any sort of like, I don't know how to put it, wiring or systems or any integration of any air-to-ground munitions, like at all, any types of bombs, or not at all?
Well, without getting into like the technical details of it, I'll just give you an anecdotal answer to that. So the only air-to-ground thing I ever did was air-to-ground strafe. So using the 20 millimeter cannon in an air-to-ground capacity. That is in accordance with like what we're required to be proficient at, or just have like kind of a cursory knowledge of. It was focused on the National Guard units that sat alert for the United States, and we just needed to be proficient at that in case we needed to do that in an alert role. So yeah, only air-to-ground gunnery, and even that is not what you would expect it to be. We don't have a radio altimeter, so you use essentially the standby reticle, which is an adjustable, air quotes again, iron sight that you can put on the HUD. You do some math, some trigonometry, and to put the thing on the thing. And if you're at the correct altitude, at the correct angle on your strafe run, the bullets will go where you point them. So that is the extent of my air-to-ground experience.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense for an aircraft of that type. So how does the F-15 versus or actually the F-15C versus F-15E feel within the community? Like, is there some sort of like rivalry, joking around, messing with each other because like one is specifically air-to-air and the other is more air-to-ground focused?
Yeah, that definitely exists. And I would never, disparage the F-15E community. Those guys have been doing great work for decades, for sure. And the C model and the single seat Eagle community is kind of a weird community Air Force wide, right? Because you know cultures for specific jets are going to grow and develop from like the ops and deployment tempo and what they're being asked to do, their TTPs, and their shared experiences across the squadrons. So it's kind of easy to forget that the Strike Eagle has spent essentially 3 decades doing, actual dropping of bombs, strike missions, CAS missions, where the C model, you know, except for a few onesie twosies, we've essentially just been doing air-to-air training and like air policing. So it's one of the only fighter platforms that has been, essentially singularly focused on one mission set. So just by that nature, it's going to breed two very different cultures. There's no animosity, there's good-natured ribbing, I think, between the two. And then just like and on any fighter platform, right? The Vipers are going to rib the E model guys. So there's definitely that, and that's one of the great things about military aviation is that that fosters a sense of community, and it's just a natural byproduct of the mission sets that the platforms do.
Makes sense. So what do you know about the, can you tell, if at all, the listeners about the upgrade that's coming out for the F-15EX, and not, obviously not going into anything OPSEC specific, but yeah, can you like tell the listeners more about that type of upgrade?
Yeah, well, honestly, no, not really. It's it's kind of after the time that I was involved in it. I had some chances to get some some briefings on it, and kind of some of the like the big picture upgrades. I mean, yeah, it's all public source information, fly by wire, new cockpit, new engines, new radar, all that kind of stuff. Great stuff. I can speculate purely as an outsider looking in at this point, that again, it's a big platform. It's got 2 big motors. It's got a lot of power, big radar, and now with the EX all being 2-seat models, although they are single pilot optional, there's a lot of expandable opportunity there in that platform for whatever the future of air combat is going to look like. I would be remiss if I speculated on what that would look like, but we've all seen news and drones are a new thing, UASs and smart autonomous wingmen and all. So really the limits are endless, I think, and it's one of the reasons I think personally why the Air Force has invested such a big amount of a large amount of money into continuing the F-15 line with the EX. And then let's not forget hypersonic munitions, right? You have a telephone pole sized munition you need to put on an airplane. You can't put it on a Viper. You don't want to put it on an F-35 or an F-22. Strap that thing to the center station of an F-15 and there you go. So that flexibility is I think going to be almost inadvertently that because the F-15 was going to die a few 5-10 years ago. So that flexibility I think will be fully utilized in future air combat type scenarios.
And it kind of extends the life of the F-15 as a platform as well. And so with you can speculate on what the F-15EX does, but with you flying the F-15C, what are some of the upgrades you would want to see in your opinion? Like, what are some of the stuff where you're like, I wish the F-15C had this, and we could speculate whether or not it's on the EX or not. But in your opinion, what kind of things you would just love to have on the F-15C?
Give me 24 AMRAAMs or whatever the
Oh,
next version of that is.
oh man,
24 AMRAAMs, a
more
bunch of
rails.
gas. Oh yeah. Well, the EX, it opens up 2 extra stations on the
Yeah.
outboards of the wings that have always been there, but have been essentially deactivated due to instability
Okay.
in the aerodynamic regime. But yeah, that opens those up. You got those quad launchers that actually we've seen in some air shows as like demoed with 4 AMRAAMs per launcher. Oh yeah,
Yep.
give me 24 AMRAAMs and a 4 ship of EXs and let's go get it.
Oh man.
Here I was as a Viper, as virtual Viper pilot, thinking that you guys had plenty when you guys carry 8, and here you are asking for
Wish I had more.
24. And
Yeah. Goodness.
yeah, and we can only carry 6, and we're giving up heaters and stuff. Oh,
Did you ever have any experience with the AESA radar, or was that a little bit after you were in there?
Actually, I would say the majority of my experience in the C model was with the ABG-63 V3 ESA radars.
Okay. Nice.
Um, yeah, so I had a little bit of experience in the B course, and then as I first got back to the squadron with the MEXCAN V0s and V1s, the V2s weren't really a part of the guard at all. And so my time getting to the squadron, and then by the time I left, I think we had upgraded all except for, one Gusting 2, essentially red airplanes to ESA radars. So yeah, big, great improvement to the airframe, to the platform. Just a phenomenal radar.
So you're able to see both. You saw the mechanical and the AESA radar,
Oh
and
yeah,
that's a
absolutely.
wow. That's I couldn't imagine how much faster the scope would like build, and how better it was to track things, because the AESA radar uses the electronically scanned stuff, so it scans almost instantaneously instead of the mechanical
Force
one
multiplier.
physically. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. A force multiplier for sure.
So with that being said, the let's get back into the BMS Eagle. So some of us have, I don't know if some of the listeners have even tried the Eagle or even know that the Eagle is in Falcon BMS, but it is it is full fidelity. You can click all the buttons, the screens work. You can go into the menus, you do all that stuff, and it's really nice. So when it first came out a couple years ago, it was super clunky. Like, it was, we were so excited about it to have another aircraft other than the Viper, but some of the switches didn't work. The flight model was like super basic. There was a bug with your screen being like a DTC or a F-16 Viper type of look if you didn't do something right. The controls were a little weird. So at first it was a little buggy, but people loved it because you had the engines, it had the speed, it had the more missiles, and it had the radar. So those are the things that you really want out of an aircraft, and to make it different and to separate itself from the Viper. And people are using it left and right. Even had it was even one of the first aircraft to get the Link 16. So they implemented the Link 16 on the Eagle, and you're able to see things based on what the AWAC sees, and it was really nice. And us in BMS are used to other aircraft being just basically a Viper skin, or having a Viper, a skin of a F-15, but all the radar and the avionics and the interaction between it is a Viper. So we had before the Eagle full fidelity came out, we had the Eagle, but it was all Viper avionics. So you had the Viper radar, it even had the cockpit sometimes. You had the Viper radar, the Viper RWR, the sounds were all the same. So basically had that F-16 DNA, but it was still able to get high and fast with more fuel. With your experience, when you first flew the F-15 in BMS, was that during this clunky stage, or did you kind of start here recently?
So great question, and I should have looked back on like when my first BMS flight in the Eagle was, because I don't 100% know the answer to that. I will give you, my experience hopping into the C model in BMS when I did. It was a much different experience than it is today, and will be in the next few months for sure. But I will say that I had experiences, back in the day of like, oh, you can fly a B1, but you have a F-16, cockpit, and it's not really a B1. It just looks like a B1. So I did not get that sense when I first hopped into the F-15C in BMS. There were a lot of things worked really well, and this was post the implementation of Link 16. So that was there. The radar, while based on code from the F-16 in BMS, functioned and looked very similar to what I would expect in an F-15C. There were definitely some switches and some things that just didn't really work right or didn't feel right. Some of the flight model didn't feel 100% correct. But it definitely, jumping in there, I was able to go from, never not having been in BMS for years and years and years to hopping in VR, cold start, everything worked how I'd expect it to, with a few caveats to it, and it was very impressive. So I never got the sense, since I had been flying the F-15C in BMS, that it was a reskinned Viper, as it were, and that progress, as you guys both know, has just been exponentially improved on over the last year to year and a half for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely been improved because we flew before the full fidelity thing was implemented. We would fly the Eagle sometimes, and it would literally have the screen. It would only have one screen, but it would be an F-16 screen. So you could switch between a sit page and your FCR. So it would go back and forth between the two, and we know that you have your vertical situation display for your radar, and then your sit page and other things for your situation and your HSD type of thing. So yeah, when I was flying back then in like 4.4 or something, or 4.34, it was definitely just Eagle skin around a Viper, but we still used it because it had the engines, it had the fuel, like it really got up there really high, and it was great even then.
Yeah, it was 4.37 when I first got into it, and I'm very thankful that I didn't try to hop in on some of those earlier
Yeah,
stages, because
yeah.
seeing like the Vibe, I've been like, oh yeah, no,
Like,
I'm
oh
I'm
boy.
not down with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so I was fortunate to hop in at 4.37 something, and it was about, you know 75% of where it is now for sure.
Have you ever flown? Have you flown in the F-16 in BMS, or are you just strictly on the Eagle, so it's comfortable to you and more usable?
I've tried a couple times, and again, I flew the F-16 in Falcon 4.0 and Open Falcon, way back in the day. Great simulator, and the few times I've tried to hop in the Viper in BMS, I'm just like, I just don't have a whole lot of time. I get a couple flights a week if I'm lucky,
Yeah.
and I don't have the time to dedicate to like learning
Another
those systems
another
and
airplane, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, fully, there's some great stuff in those, especially as you get into some of the like the Israeli variants and the Hellenic and all that kind of stuff. But it's just not been something I focus on. Maybe as I finally get into retirement and get some more time available, I'll take a stab at it. But I have not gotten a chance to really learn that yet.
Yeah, there's because the Eagle has its own thing. So I remember when Eagle came out, we were flying the 15 and the 16 together. So you have the 16 doing more air to ground stuff and then as a backup to air, but you have the Eagle as a like a spearheaded air to air fighter in front, taking care of the F-16s and the F-16s is being a backup, but mostly air to ground or seed or deed or whatever. So with the new F-15C coming out, the technical challenges around the Viper, which I saw immediately in flying the Eagle, was that the radar is a lot better. It's like physically like twice, maybe three times larger than the Viper ones. So you could see things far, you could lock onto things easier, and if they're because usually in the Viper you don't see a F-15 size airplane until about maybe 40 miles or so, 45-ish. But in the Eagle, it's at like 60, maybe even 70 miles. You could see something and actually get a lock onto it and start going into afterburner, get to 40, 50,000 feet and like launch a missile. So having the Eagle out there along with the Vipers really created that sense of a real life package in BMS, and it really adds on to the experience that you have in BMS.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that really struck me as like so impressive about the BMS community and the development that BMS has done, is that it's, I mean, yeah, we can, you know, ranges, numbers, okay, those are all going to be based on open source information, sure, but you know, the fact that they were able to develop an F-15C that essentially fills the role that you would see in a real world, you know, combat scenario. I mean, golf clap. I mean, it's just very impressive that they were able to kind of put that in as this niche, you know, fighter that's fulfilling the role that it was designed to do, and it's executed in a way that really feels like, you know, my experience is actually flying the Eagle. You know, you're doing escort roles, you're doing DCA, and it's excelling at the points where the real F-15C excels at. So I think they've really hit the nail on the head with how they implemented the C model in BMS, and it's just, I think, in my opinion, it's opened up an entire, you know, second life to the BMS system. You know, where it's filling the role it was designed to.
And there's a lot of people coming from DCS wishing that BMS had something else, because DCS has it in the bag when it comes to the Hornet, when it comes to the F-14, the F-4, the F-100 now. So they definitely have the market cap on most airplanes, and especially with helicopters. However, the BMS has the cap on, debatably has the cap on the F-16, but now with the F-15C specifically, it definitely has a ownership of that because it's a full fidelity. The F-15E or F-15C in DCS is a flaming cliff, so you can't click all the buttons. It's like a basic model, not a basic model, but a basic use of it. So you can't click anything in the cockpit. It has the engine, has the gas, so you could get everything you want, but it's not that full fidelity that people want or need in a simulator. And that's why people are starting to come from DCS to BMS, especially once they know that it has a full fidelity Eagle in it.
Well, and look, I'm biased, right? So coming from the C model community where we do one thing and we do one thing well, you know, I appreciate, you know, a focused platform, right? I don't have a whole lot of experience in DCS. I flew, you know, Black Shark way back in the day in my college years and all that, but this in the most recent iterations, I just haven't had much of a chance to kind of delve into that. But I think the C model in BMS was developed with all the developers knowing that BMS is an F-16 simulator, but they want to develop something that's high fidelity that complements in a realistic way how an F-15C would complement a Viper. And so unlike what I assume the DCS model is of, like, you know, we got, you know, P-51s and Super Sabres and F-4s. So there's a lot of really great high fidelity aircraft in DCS that study sim level and all that. The F-15C and BMS was developed essentially to be the highest fidelity supplement to the Viper in a real world modern scenario, as modern as you can make it based on open source information, and they crushed it on that front. I mean, even we haven't gotten into like the 80s or anything like that, but they have A models you can fly with Sparrows, so they use that what I appreciate, that very singularly focused route of development for the Eagle in BMS, and I think that works really complementarily to the Viper.
So with your explanation of the complement of the Eagle and the Viper, what exercises have you gone through in real life for what real life how do I put this? What real life complements have you seen from the Eagle and the Viper together? Is there any, not clashing, but is there any type of I'm better than you at this, or I'm better than you at this, other than the I'm obviously better than a Viper at air to air? But when it comes down to it, have you ever been saved, quote unquote, by a Viper in an air to air regime, or does this didn't happen?
So I'll give you a story, and again, this is not to disparage any other community, but I always go back to this memory of doing my mission commander upgrade at RedFlag Nellis. So there's 40 airplanes on Blue Air, tons of squadrons, and I'm the mission commander for the OCA push. So essentially, we've got to escort in strikers to Red Air land. They got to drop some bomb stuff and do their things, and I'm looking at it from the from the whole package overview of like, how do I position these forces and everything. And I'll never forget, I had a Strike Eagle deputy wing commander was leading one of the flights of Strike Eagles that was in my package, and he was like, hey man, like it's great, like you guys are going to go do air to air, but hey, why don't we go out there first, and we'll just we got some bombs to drop, but we'll just go out there, we'll just sling our AMRAAMs out, and we'll take out the initial wave of red air, and then we'll skate, we'll go back, you guys can clean everything up, everything will be great. And I'm like, okay, I'm a young captain at the time, just trying to kind of wrap my nugget around all this force packaging and everything, and I'm like, yeah man, sounds good. Just there's one thing, like, you're going to do air to air, go out there, shoot your missiles, go out on time. Just please don't die, because, if you do, we're going to lose a bunch of air to ground munitions. It's going to go really poorly. No, man, we got it. We're fine. We're fine. So I roll with that, much to the chagrin of my instructor of record for my upgrade. And what happens on the first commit? Strike Eagles go out, they shoot. 3 of the 4 die right off the bat. And so I'm sitting in the airplane at 40,000 feet at night in Nellis, like, oh my gosh, what have I done? So, yeah, I mean, kind of that story long-winded to get around to the point of, again, I appreciate when you can do something and do something well, and not to say like, there was 100 different mitigating circumstances that caused that to happen, right? But the the Vipers, the E models doing their amazing air to ground work. And yes, they have the ability of self-protecting, of being, backstops to, if things are going poorly on the air to air picture. So, I think if you try to get too multi-rolled across the board, you end up losing some sort of tactical efficiency, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. You do, if you're good at everything, but you're not good at one thing. You're not a guru at one thing. So if you're tasked for this one thing, if you're tasked for air to air, but you also do air to ground on the side, then you're not as good as you should be with air to air. But if you are focused on air to air, which is the Eagle, the F-15C, you get really, really good at air to air. But if you're a well-rounded machine, you're not good for specific roles in a package environment. So yeah, I could definitely see how broadening your experiences can kind of chip away some of the experiences in one specific area.
Yeah, it's jack of all trades, master of none, right?
Yeah.
And the story is to illustrate that, like, by the C model, especially in a BMS context of supplementing the F-16, by them being able to go out and do their air-to-air work and do it really well, it essentially opens up more effective use of the F-15Es, the F-16s in their roles that they're designed for that package. Could you take, a 4-ship of Vipers or 4-ship of Strike Eagles, put them in a DCA lane, have 100% really great success with them? Absolutely. But some of the great multiplayer missions that I've, had the privilege of flying in BMS, they're really great when they use the strengths of the platforms to the max extent possible. And the Eagle in BMS essentially enables the Vipers to do even better work air to ground, and so that's one of the really exciting things about how the Eagle has been implemented into BMS.
And with I was flying with Starlight, so the BVR timeline in BMS is significantly expanded in the Eagle in BMS, because now you can shoot a missile at 50 miles and have at least a 60% PK depending on what the other aircraft does. So you can shoot a pretty good missile that puts the other aircraft at a defensive at like 50 miles. With the Viper, you can't do that because one, you can't even really see them because your radar's not good enough, and two, you can't get that fast without burning up all your fuel. So already there in the air-to-air regime, the Eagle is better at doing its thing, which that's what it was for. So that's another thing with getting good at something specific if you do it all the time, and that's another thing that the Eagle does a lot better than the Viper, and it really complements on a large package and focus on that air-to-air task.
And the numbers aren't going to be 100% accurate, of course. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
why would they? It's a simulator.
Yep.
But the effects of the weapon systems implemented in BMS is as close to the real effects that you would get in a force packaged real world scenario as I've seen on any simulating platform.
So I have a quick question. Saint, in BMS, I've come across a bunch of people, maybe too many, that think like, okay, so scenario, we're planning a mission. Oh, I'm carrying GBU 38s. Your task is air to ground. Okay, but I can self escort. Okay, but there's a SA2 over there. That's cool. I can like fly low and lob. Like, I am of the opinion that sometimes when your aircraft is multi-role does not mean that you can do or you should be doing everything in the same mission. What do you think about this?
Yeah, that's a great question and an interesting point in the context of the BMS community. Hey, we're all out there to have fun, right? In the simulating community, right? Everybody wants to, kill things, kill airplanes, all that kind of stuff, and that's awesome. So I've definitely seen missions where they're being developed, and somebody who's been flying the Viper in BMS for years and years, and it's like, well, no, I'm used to going out there and shooting the guy at 30 miles, and it's gonna get a little hairy, but we're gonna power through it and everything like that. And what I love seeing is when kind of the eyes open to, okay, let's not take all that risk initially on the initial push into the objective that we're going to, if we're going to bomb a runway or whatever, that's the objective of the mission, right? Let's spread that risk out over the entire mission. So maybe you don't self-escort all the way into the target area, right? Let the Eagles get up there, whittle away the picture, get sent into some offensive caps, and then guess what? When we're retrograding and we've already lost some airplanes, and now we need Vipers with AMRAAMs, in a backstop cap. They've dropped their munitions. Now they're tactically relevant in an air-to-air regime. Now they're there, and it's their time to shine, and they're out there they're delousing C models as they're coming out of the cap and trying to escort people out. So it's a little bit of a paradigm shift from let's fight our way in, shoot our AMRAAMs, and then just run away and hope that we've got a guy that can stagger back and take a Fox 2 on somebody and save the mission from failure. It's a much more like, let's think about this smartly and spread the risk over the entire mission. So I offer that to the Viper guys. There's been some great servers I've flown on Prime. I've flown with you on a bunch of these missions, where if you kind of like lay out how that tactical risk can be spread out over the entire mission, like you're going to get your chance to shoot your AMRAAMs. Trust me. If I'm Eagle 1 and we've got 2 AMRAAMs left and we're trying to get the package out of the target area, and there's a 4 ship of Vipers that have just shacked all their targets and they got a full air-to-air loadout, like, dude, you're getting called up and you're going to get sent in there to go shoot them. So it's just, I think it's a little bit of a mentality shift, but I've seen it happen, and it's kind of beautiful when it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Saint, are there habits or muscle memory cues that the real Eagle pilots have that the sim either reinforces or breaks?
Well, definitely right off the bat, like all the muscle memory that I had from flying the C model translates, almost 100% to the BMS version of it. So, which is great because, I got the whole, F-15 HOTAS from Wind Wing, so all the switches are exactly where I expect them to be. So that's awesome. It's definitely probably the biggest thing that stands out to me is like I never really thought about this much flying, but I do more in BMS. Is like something like the loft, and I've been trying to think on like what it is that kind of is the disconnect between flying the actual aircraft and BMS. And I think it's that, because you're not dealing with the actual physiological sensations of, high G and flying, it kind of frees up just that, that extra 10 to 20% of your brain to think about it. So like I remember when I first started flying the Eagle and BMS, I'm like, oh wow, I'm really ahead of the airplane on this timeline. So like, shit, I'm just gonna fucking loft to sorry, excuse my language, but I'll loft to 45 degrees and boom, fire the AMRAAMs off. And then as I kind of dived into some of the guys who have been flying the sim a lot longer than I had, they're talking about like, well, if it's inside of a certain range, maybe a 30-degree loft for kinematics is better. Like, and it's something that I never really thought about in the actual airplane. Because 90%, 99% of the time we're flying with simulated munitions. And B, it's just you didn't have the brain bites to really kind of gnat's ass, what you were doing physically with the airplane versus just focused on like the tactical picture and the employment. So that's kind of the two things, like the muscle memory translated very, very well, and then the extra brain bites from being at 0 knots and 0 feet essentially, kind of freed up some ability to think about some of the minutia in air-to-air employment that I wouldn't have thought in the actual aircraft.
That's very interesting because I've with not flying the Eagle, but I do fly Cessnas, and I fly the same thing with in I you fly in Cessnas. It's still that there's loudness. There's you're always worried about dying. So that's also a thing as well. In simulators, you're not worried about that. You're in your office in your house on a Saturday flying a simulator. So the fact that you may be in trouble and get hurt or die is like out the window. So you basically do anything you want, and it removes that that processing power of your brain to have to worry about any of those things. So it gives you a little bit more space to actually do. It allows you to open more tabs open instead of 14 tabs being about not killing myself.
Yeah, 100%. And a good example of that is, again, going back to the loft, like, in the actual airplane, say you're at 45,000 feet, going Mach whatever, and you're at the point where you need to engage, you need to loft, and you need to do all the things you need to do to get that simulated AMRAAM off the rail. But, you're thinking of 100 other things as well, like, what's my airspeed? Am I in the wing rock? Like, do I have the energy to aggressively pull to the loft I want to pull? Is the ASC circle centered? Like, so there's 1,000 other things you're thinking about, and almost subconsciously, your healthy fear of death sense in the airplane is potentially can prevent you from getting that pristine, perfect, loft angle because you're in the wing rock, or you're not at the energy state that you should have been at that point, and so some of that kind of takes over. So 100% Prime, I agree with you on that one.
And so with doing everything correctly, especially with training and in real life, you just kind of not get shot down. But in training, I know there's some tabs open when it comes to, hey, if I do this wrong, I'm gonna get berated and get feedback during the debrief. So you don't want to be an embarrassment during the debrief. You don't do stuff on purpose, but when you do stuff on accident, you want to make sure it's correct. You want to make sure the numbers are correct, the altitude, the loft, the not getting shot down by a Viper in whatever thing you're in. But does the debrief kind of stick kind of maybe orbit around in your head while you're flying around, not to do something wrong?
Not necessarily preemptively. I would say there's definitely been, real world training scenarios where, especially on upgrades, right? When it's like, you're really trying to get the most pristine execution you can get, and something during one of the TI intercepts goes poorly, or you make a wrong intercept decision or something like that, and that, it can definitely stick with you. And then even, on kind of a smaller level, as you go through like the flight lead upgrade programs, where really you're just trying to be safe getting, out to the airspace and back, and it's less about the tactical proficiency. It's just about leading a two ship, right? So you miss a call from ATC, or you got the wrong altitude. So that stuff definitely sticks with you, and can for some people impact the rest of the sortie if you kind of just let it dwell on you. I've had many sorties where you get on the ground, I'm taxiing back, I'm covered in sweat, I'm like, oh man, that did not go well. And then you're just like kind of preempting yourself for the debrief, like, yep, this is gonna come up. This is definitely gonna come up.
Yep, they're
So
definitely going
that
to talk
that
about that.
definitely weighs on you a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's gonna make the board.
So I know with me, when flying around, like you said, when you mentioned check rides, and that is like, if the listener's never been through a check ride, that is the most nervous that you'll probably ever be. Sometimes the person's sitting next to you in a Cessna, sometimes the person's sitting behind you, or the person's in your flight doing the same thing. So you're just always hoping that you don't do something wrong, but you're also wanting to do the best that you can. But there's always that small little thing in your head, but you have to not let it get to you the entire flight, because you can do something wrong here, and if you dwell on it the entire flight, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So you always have to separate the thing between doing something right and having the debrief afterwards, and like the embarrassment, but you still have to fly the airplane. So like they taught me in flight school, so it's aviate, navigate, communicate. So you make sure you fly the airplane first, need to know where you're going second, and then communication is at the end. So you need to be able, if you can't fly the plane, why communicate if you can't fly the plane? So it's like the three kind of rules there. You need to be able to fly the plane first, navigate second, and then third, communicate what you're doing. But in general, you need to fly the airplane first because you're in it.
Yeah, 100%. And the C model community real world does a great job, I think, sometimes to a fault of focusing on the debrief. And I think any Eagle driver will tell you that the learning happens in the debrief. So nobody's ever had a perfect flight. I fly for the airlines now, and that's a mantra we say, and the Air Force is the same way, right? There's always going to be something you can improve upon. Nobody's ever had a perfect flight, ever, right? And so, we in the community don't really like worry about necessarily like, oh, this is, this I screwed this up. This is going to be embarrassing. You kind of just are taught from an early point to like own it and then learn from that mistake so that you can improve going forward. And that's one of the great things about military aviation. And one thing that I see mirrored a lot in some of the BMS flights I've done online with some of the larger groups is people are out there, not nobody's getting berated in a debrief, right? Or like, hey man, this was dumb. You don't come back. We don't, you're not good enough for this or whatever. It's people are there to learn and to kind of get enjoyment from like, you know, from attempting to master these amazing machines. And that translates so well from real world military flying into the BMS community because people are so enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, it's definitely that enthusiasm towards getting the BMS, and the because we're not able to get the experiences in an F-15 or a 16 or whatever to be able to do BVR combat, but BMS and DCS is the closest thing we can get to get that same type of that philosophy and that experience you get. Maybe not the G's, maybe not the sweat, but I mean, you can get that process pretty well experienced that normal people would never be able to experience ever.
So, Saint, the first time you jumped into the BMS Eagle, what was the most immediately obvious thing that was kind of off compared to your experience with the real aircraft? Was it the radar, the HUDs, the feel while trying the BFM? What was it, if any?
Yeah, Physics, that's kind of that's a tough one because I can't remember immediately, even with a critical eye being like, oh man, like this is way off. I think at the time, the first time I jumped into the Eagle and BMS, I was just so impressed with like what the what they had already developed that I kind of overlooked a lot of stuff. And as I talked to some of the developers and kind of dove a little bit further into it, it became more apparent like my initial just like impressed nature with BMS. There were definitely some flaws in there. I think probably and this is even a tough one now, even though I've thought about this for a little bit. The flight model, I would say, is probably the largest like glaring factor that's not representative. And that's a tough one though, because everybody's using different, HOTAS systems, and I've done my best in my own pit to like recreate as close to realistic as possible. The Eagle HOTAS and the controls and everything, and it's still a little off. So I think that was probably the most glaring thing. The fact that like so many of the systems worked as close to realistically as they do in the real aircraft was just impressive across the board. Um, and then you get into like some of the like super nitty gritty system stuff, and yeah, that could be improved in some of the like system fault scenarios and all that kind of stuff. But it definitely didn't take away from. I look at the whole Eagle BMS as like a package, and like, do you get the experience that you would in an actual F-15? And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think it's like 90% there. I've had guys from the squadron come over, jump in my pit, and like they're blown away as well. They put the VR on, like, oh my goodness, like, so it, you know it, I'd be nitpicking to try to find something that's like super egregious.
Yeah, there's
Yeah, it's like one of those things where there's so much good there that even the bad that is there in all things does not detract from all the good that is there. I would say.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a simulator, right? I've flown the Boeing sims, and you can nitpick things on those as well. So nothing's ever going to be 100%, but the the fact that it is where it is very impressive.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
makes
about
sense.
that experience, try to get the same point across. It might not be completely correct, but you can get the point across, get those experiences, get the timeline and the tactical relevancy of different things with that, and that's what the simulator is all about. And like you said, when everybody has different hardware, different sticks, different axes, different whatever. So with your setup, I know the F-15C has like a center stick. Do you have like the extension, or do you have just the base and like the little stick with like the normal uh uh I guess deflection and the length, or do you have an actual extension in your pit?
Yeah, so I started because my pit's kind of a hybrid. I also do like iRacing stuff, so it initially was a sim racing setup, and then so I got the WinWing F-15EX stick and throttle, which are very very good. And initially it was a side stick, and then I got very frustrated the first time I tried to air-to-air refuel in BMS, and I'm like, man, I mean, I know I've been out of the jet for a couple months at this point, but I don't ever remember it being this hard. So, I upgraded to a center extension. Um, so I've got the center extension now, and it's kind of the ergonomics under VR feel very similar to what I would, what I remember from the actual aircraft. I think the biggest um, haven't got quite there yet is the stick force. Like in the actual C model, the stick is very, very heavy. In fact, for a lot of like BFM maneuvers, depending on how long you've been on that sortie, like it can be a two-handed affair to kind of get full deflection on, where on your ailerons or stabs or whatever. So um, it's definitely a much lighter feel, but it definitely feels correct under VR, um, but just a much lighter control feel overall.
Yeah, I remember at the Flight Sim Expo, Wind Control now. They changed their name. It was random, but I usually still call them Wind Wing. But they had a booth there, and they had their Orion, like, looks like a actuator like from an airplane. So they have an actuator basically as the base, and it does force feedback. So it'll push you like it'll. I was flying the P-51, and at the time, a real P-51 pilot came in and said this is a little bit heavier than what it's supposed to be, especially in the left and right, the roll, the lateral. So I got in there and I was flying around, and yes, like you have to sometimes put two hands if you want to stay on a BFM. You got to put both hands on there because you have to put like 20 pounds or something, 20, 25 pounds for a long period of time. Your arm starts to get tired of doing that. And then if you're in G's, this does the same thing. Like it's just everything gets tired. So I could definitely see and understand the differences between having a force feedback stick and giving you the actual feedback of what the stick actually does. In a P-51, it really exacerbates the feedback you get because it's more pulleys and cables. But in with the BMS and the sticks we have now, it's mostly just like the hallway thing, or it's not an actual. There's no actual weight to it. It's very, very light depending on what springs you put in there, but you can't get to the 20 pounds as you do in the real airplane. So I could definitely see the differences between how you could see the flight model being different based on what hardware you have.
Yeah, and again, BMS developed on the F-16 platform, all fly-by-wire, barely any movement in the stick, and the comparison on like a P-51 cables and pulleys versus the C model, which is it's a hydromechanical system with a little bit of like power steering from some electronics, but essentially it's all push rods and it's a direct link to the actuators in the flight controls, but you don't get any feedback back from that. It's just a very heavy system, and the push rod is manipulating an actuator, and then that's using hydraulic pressure to maneuver the flight control surface. So even if the stabs are chattering or something like that, you don't feel that coming back to the stick. It's just because of the hydromechanical nature of the flight control system, it's just very, very heavy. And so I think that's it's tough to replicate, but give me a force feedback stick that you could just put like a 30-pound pressure on any movement off of center, and I'll be like, yeah, that sounds good. I haven't found a spring that can do that yet, but
yeah, I don't think there's any springs, but Wind Control has those actuator looking things. It's really impressive. They were flying the F-14 Tomcat right next to me, and they're adjusting the software of it when it comes to the performance. So when they got to like 2 or 3 G's, it would like start to sound like a jackhammer. So it would like it was like really make weird noises. So yeah, it was pretty crazy.
That's awesome. I mean, I paired, we're slightly off topic here, but like I have base shaker haptics for racing, and I was able to find a piece of software for BMS that essentially you can put in, the feel of the gear coming down or the feel of the buffet and all that kind of stuff. And that I won't even fly without that. That's like a mandatory for me now. It adds that level of realism. That's just because so much of it is a visceral feeling.
Yes.
And just having that feedback is amazing. I highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in it.
Yeah, if you don't have that
off topic curious. Sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, if you don't have that other sense of feeling how the aircraft are performing, you don't get that sense anymore. Like with the G's, you don't know how much you're turning because you're in your office chair. But in the real jet, you could physically feel how much you're turning, and if the aircraft is going to stall based off the buffet. So there's definitely a different dynamic of being able to feel the
energy
airplane.
management.
Yep.
I mean, energy management is taught at the B course based on feel, right? You get a little bit of I forget what they like, just like people jumping on the wings. That's like the light buffet, and you're not bleeding energy yet. And then you get the elephants on the wings where you can really feel it, and then now you're bleeding energy. And so you don't have to look at airspeed to know that. You can just feel it. And so having haptics, you can set it up so that you start feeling a buffet, and just instinctively that I'm bleeding energy in this pull.
Yep.
Yeah, I've heard that from I think it was that other fighter pilot, C.W. Lemoyne, said something along the lines of, I think it was him. Anyways, I don't want to misquote someone, but I think it was him that said that us in the sim world rely much more on avionics than real life pilots because we don't have the feel for it at all yet, at least with current technology. And also, I had a quick curiosity. You mentioned racing. What type of racing do you do? Like, what game do you use?
So primarily iRacing. So that's kind of always been a passion of mine. I know this is totally off topic now, but even when I was in pilot training, like I had, a BMW and like a spec racer Porsche and everything. So I would go to the track and drive those. And so it's always been a passion of mine. And I found when I stopped flying, we talked about that itch earlier, right? So like flying BMS was great. And then also the driving stuff is, standard fighter pilot, just need adrenaline kind of thing. So that's always been a passion of mine as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely trying to need to get me I'm at my desk. I got a 34 extra ultra wide on a boom. I can move it back and forth. I'm at my chair with the clamps for the center stick on the desk, so I can put my actually it's the Hornet stick, which is basically the same thing. So the Hornet stick in the middle and be able to use it. I am thinking about getting a actual like pit or at least a chair you could sit in, and it's like back a little bit. They have the mounts on both sides, so that'll be something a little different when it comes to me doing more sims, and probably get a Buffet or something to give that tactical feel, because it even in a Cessna, if you're flying a Cessna, you know that you're about to start stalling if you're doing some spins or something. You can definitely, it's definitely a thing you need to be able to fly better in simulators.
Yeah, the first pit I had, I built out of PVC and plywood, so it's yeah, it's a game changer.
Game changer.
So, Saint, earlier you mentioned you're bringing over your friends of yours or comrades of yours from other pilots to test out BMS. What do like pilots that have no prior contact or not a big contact with sims beforehand and don't, I guess, now? What do they like think of us that are into flight sims? Do they think like we're just a bunch of nerds, or do they actually like think we do some interesting things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I've definitely seen that, again, I've been in simming from years ago and took a long break, but, that with the generation now of current pilots, like you'd be hard pressed to find a young lieutenant or captain in a fighter squadron who isn't either a gamer or have a lot of familiarity with like either racing sims or flight sims. So I think, you talk to some of the older guys when I first got in the squadron who were, lieutenant colonels and stuff, and they just couldn't even use a computer to save their lives.
Yeah.
It's a different ball game these days. Like I know, shoot, half the guys in my squadron, we would game on the weekends, and so that stigma isn't really a thing anymore. I've at the airline I work for, I've flown with many guys, and we'll get on the topics of like what are your hobbies, and 50% of the time, 60% of the time, they're into flight sims or racing sims or gaming or any of that kind of stuff. So it's definitely um, not anything like it used to be probably 10, 15 years ago. I think it's definitely more of a common thing, um, for sure.
And it's more easier to get involved with. Like people have I mean, if you like video games, you have a computer. Back then, if you like video games, you probably had a Nintendo 64. You didn't necessarily have a computer. So it's a lot easier to get into simulators now because it's more easily accessible. You can build your own computer at home. You got DCS, you got Falcon BMS, you got IL2 flight simulator, like even Microsoft Flight Simulators on Xbox and PlayStation. So, and they have some peripherals where you could, if you don't want to use the controller, you can have at least a joystick and a throttle stuff. So it is a lot easier to get into simulators now than it was 20 years ago. So that's another factor as well. But it is, when I go places, that's one of the things I say when I do for fun. I play simulators and do RC planes and do photography, and I have a YouTube channel. But it's really nice to be able to use that when, especially if you haven't flown in a while, or if you are flying now, you can still get that procedural repetition of a ILS landing, a GPS landing, get your instruments down. You can still do a couple of things in there, even though it is in a simulator. So it's a very good experience booster, and it's really good to be able to do that in the comfort of your own house.
Yeah, and the barrier to entry, like you said, Prime, like with Microsoft Flight Sim 2024 on Xbox, essentially 80% of what you would get on a PC. Now, let's not kid ourselves. BMS, the technical quirks that it has to get into a 40-person, multiplayer mission are a lot,
Yeah, that's a
for a
lot.
lot of
Yep.
people for sure. But those only get more refined over time, and those who are passionate about it that actually want to get involved in those. It's not nearly. I mean, I am essentially computer illiterate, and if I can do it, anybody can do it for sure.
So we're talking about simulators. So with your Eagle experience, what type of procedures were you going on in simulators? Because I know for us playing simulators, we do everything. We do emergency procedures, we do BFM, we do actual campaigns, we have everything. But what type of uh of simulator sessions did you have? Like the point of it, was it um, emergency procedures? Was it to get the BVR timeline down? Was it familiarization with avionics? Like, what was the reasoning for going to the sim, other than like your basic B course training? But when you're at the actual squadron, what were some of the reasons you would go to the simulator?
Yeah, so essentially all of the above, right? So at the squadron we had four, and I'm not even gonna be able to remember the actual names of WTTs or whatever the acronym is they have now, but we had four relatively high fidelity 4-panel sims, so 3 panels laterally, 1 panel kind of just above your forehead, with a full uh, yeah, these were Boeing sims, right? So these were full pits, the FPCD, everything looks just like it would in the airplane. So we had those in the squadron. We would use those for quarterly EP training. So you'd have to do an EP sim every quarter, I believe it was. And then some facilities throughout the world had like full clamshell F-15 simulators. Now, I'm not speaking to like what the Viper has or the F-35, the F-22. They probably have way better stuff than we had. But from the Eagle perspective, those were what we had, and so we would use the squadron sims for EP stuff, or if you're going to go do an upgrade ride and it's going to be a TI ride, you can go have somebody run the console, give you a picture, and you can practice your intercept geometry or your decision making. So you can just go hit buckets of balls in the sims prior to a flight in the actual jet. Super valuable for that. The fun part of that also is sometimes on a Friday we would, you know, maybe have a cocktail or two, and we'd have like a round robin, for every man for himself BFM sim session where whoever the last man is standing gets a little prize at the end. And then they had the more full fidelity sims that were at only a couple different locations in the world, and we would do sim trips out to those, and those were essentially proctored by contract SMEs, subject matter experts, and they'd give you scenarios, and you would, as a four ship, you take them very seriously, and brief the full brief, go do the flight, do the debrief, kind of be able to play everything back, get some inputs from the TAC mentors that were running the sims. So yeah, we use sims quite a bit.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I'm able to get sometimes able to get into the simulators. Here I've been in the 22, the 35, the 15, the 16. So I've been able to get into some of those
Oh heck
simulators,
yeah,
and it's really
yeah,
fun. And the the knowledge, like to a certain extent, the knowledge you could bring straight from the simulator and apply it into a real simulator. You can apply, of course, the numbers are going to be different. The numbers of AMRAMs and the numbers of the timeline, all that's different. But when it comes to like the actual like physics of bring it over, you can actually use all of it, like the being able to handle your wingman, being able to land, don't stall your airplane, don't use rudder to turn,
yeah,
like all
yeah.
that like basic stuff. You could use it in a simulator, and it's really refreshing to be able to do that in a real thing, and it's really sweet. So speaking of on our topic of simulating, so does I know people say, "Oh, graphics are everything." It's the immersion of the graphics. Does close enough simulation have value for procedural training, as you said it was? But in your experience, how was the graphics like in these simulators? or was it more like was it pretty basic graphics, or was it like high graphics? I'm pretty sure people are interested in that because that's a big thing in the simulator world where graphics are everything sometimes.
So I definitely think I'm in the minority on this one in terms of opinion. Um, I appreciate like great graphics, just like every other gamer simmer appreciates like, iRacing. I want it to be high fidelity, all that kind of stuff. The sims I used from Boeing, I would say they were okay graphics. There were upgrades coming out that I don't think I got a chance to actually fly in terms of upgraded sims that had higher fidelity graphics. Nowhere near like a Microsoft Flight Sim 2024 type level because it's not the intent, right? They don't care
Yeah.
about
Yep.
clouds and stuff like that, right? I mean, that's not the intent. But it was useful in like a simulated BFM engagement to be able to see the plan form of the aircraft you're fighting, or like have a much sharper view of what they're doing with their airplane, so you can adjust your BFM strategy real time. That was real. That was really where the higher fidelity graphics were beneficial in the real world sims. In terms of BMS, man, I think it looks great. I understand. I've seen DCS stuff. It looks amazing. Would I love to have like DCS graphics with BMS dynamic campaign
Yeah.
and all the underpart? Absolutely. Um, but at the same time, as an Eagle guy, 40,000 feet is kind of where we live and breathe, and everything looks great at 40,000 feet. So I get it. If you're at 100 feet, you're going to be kind of pissed off that the ground textures aren't 100% perfect, but it's one of those things that like I look at the whole package and like, is this detracting from like what I am looking for in this experience? And the answer is no. Now with 0.38, when we got higher fidelity mesh and stuff like that, it's great because it's immersion, right? And that's what you want. But I've been used to sims with lower fidelity graphics, and so I think it's just one of those things where like I just appreciate the nuts and bolts underneath more than what I'm looking at in my relatively crappy VR goggles.
Yeah, and like you said, it depends on the intent. If your intent is to ride around in a tank on this simulator, then the ground textures are going to need to be very good. The buildings are going to need to be good. The streets, the lamps, the stop signs, like all this stuff needs to be great. But if you're at 50,000 feet, what a stop sign looks like or a tree looks like doesn't change anything about maybe when you're landing, maybe like the trees, but you're landing for what 5 minutes, but for the other 45 minutes of the flight, you're up at 50,000 feet. So it just depends on what the intent is. And in BMS right now, you're at 50,000 feet, landing ever so often for the immersion. But the clouds is so in my opinion, I think clouds is very important because you see the clouds all the time. You're right there where the cloud is. If this cloud is like this 2D thing that BMS has right now, and it flips every now and then, after a while
Oh yeah.
you get used to
Yep.
it and you just ignore it. But it doesn't really necessarily break the immersion because you're more worried about the flanker at 25 miles shooting a missile or a SA-17 locking you up than you are of the clouds. So you kind of ignore it. But if when it comes to screenshots and videos, it looks better if the cloud is like volumetric, which is what the new update of BMS is going to be with the volumetric clouds. There's been a lot of pictures of it and stuff, but it definitely builds upon the immersion slash experience when it comes to flying in a BMS or DCS. That the graphics kind of like really pin or put a bow on the experience there. But when sometimes I kind of go back and forth on, okay, DCS, they created a a new external model of this airplane. It's like, well, that isn't really. I don't look at the external model all the time. I need you to work on the
Yeah.
cockpit. I need you to work on the grounds. I need you to work on the clouds. Like there's different things that you see more, and sometimes need to be more focus on the things that you see more rather than the amount of fasteners on an airplane.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a wrong answer to that, right? I
Yeah, there's
mean,
no
the
wrong
the
answer, but
mesh
yeah.
and the cloud upgrades, I think everybody can agree is a game changer because the mesh is paramount for low level ingress and terrain mat, all that kind of stuff. That's amazing. The clouds, of course, yeah. Nobody wanted to see rotated clouds that are 2D while you're flying. That's a given. The Is the cannon plug on the right wheel well in the correct spot when the gears extended? Like, okay, cool. That's awesome, and I get it. I mean, I'm an enthusiast as well, and I like looking at the details, and that's awesome. But with the intent of what BMS is doing, like we can sacrifice some of that
Focus
to
on
keep
something
the
else.
bigger picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, sure. Now, if we can get there, heck yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But it's priorities.
Yeah, priorities, definitely. All right. So now, Saint, I'm going to ask you a question here. So if you could learn an airplane just immediately, like you know everything about it, you could fly it, you could just solo with it, like everything, out of any era, any time on the planet, what airplane would you want to fly if you could learn it immediately? What airplane would that be? Or helicopter, just whatever.
That's not even a difficult question. Immediately, the F-22 for
F-22?
sure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Huh.
100%.
Because of their superiority.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen, I've flown with them, flown against them. I mean, I've got great buddies who went from the Eagle to the Raptor. It is just a level above, everything, right? I'm not even going to get into the F-35 F-22 debate. The fact that, again, I think you can tell from me talking for the past hour or so how appreciative I am of being very good at a specific skill set. The F-22 is just that is the pinnacle, and I've seen them do some amazing things. So that would absolutely be it for sure.
So would it be more of, I guess, the sensors? Of course, the sensors make you not a better pilot, but a better person to be able to, the situation awareness. The sensors give you a situation awareness, and I'm about 100% sure that the situation awareness of a Raptor pilot is more than an Eagle pilot. Is that kind of like where you're going to? You want that situation awareness to be able to do stuff, or is it more like the capabilities of what the Raptor does and the stealth and all that stuff?
It is the whole package and how it is all brought together for a singular purpose. Now, granted, they do have some air to ground roles. I get that.
Yeah, yeah.
But for an air dominance fighter, it has taken everything that you need to be the most effective, lethal air to air killing machine that you could make. And it delivers. I've been in red flag vols where, we're working our butt off to try to shape a picture. And, we've got maybe 4 Raptors in the entire vol. And we're just like, oh man, we're struggling here. All right, let's get the Raptors in. And you just see a 4 ship of Raptors at 50,000 feet just squeegee the entire picture,
Yep, and we're
and all
done.
the red air goes
Thank
away,
you.
and you're like, well, that looks pretty cool, And then all the way down to like the BFM level. Like I've started offensive on Raptors, and within 15 seconds, I'm wondering what just happened and why am I guns drinking to the floor.
Yeah, what is going on?
So
It's behind me.
it is the entire package. Just an amazing airplane.
Awesome. So would it be, in your opinion, worth it if you could have the, I guess, RCS of a Raptor and you just slap it on the F-15C, but everything else of the F-15 is the same? Would that be a suitable like a suitable supplement of being able to get into the Raptor? So if you can't, like, you have to take a while to learn it, you got to go through the B course and all that. But what if you could just slap the RCS of a Raptor on the F-15? How would that make you feel?
Well, I think even the avionics in the F-15 have developed. Even as I was leaving flying the F-15, there had been some significant developments in terms of how the pilot aircraft interface worked and everything. And so, that's a developing uh, system.
Yeah.
And no, I don't think it would be. I think just the way the Raptor essentially combines everything together as like a functioning ecosystem is unique, and you can't just put LO on an Eagle or an F-18 and say like, yeah, that's good enough. It's the thoughts that go into how everything interacts together that really make the magic that something like the F-22 has a reality. So no, and I'm under no illusion. I think the F-15 is good at things that the Raptor is not good at. You can't put 24 AMRAAMs on a Raptor, but that's not the intent, right? So there it all goes back to intent. So yeah, I think it's just something so special that you can't try to break bits off of it and put it on something else and say, oh, this is just as good, because it just doesn't get the full experience.
Yep, it's not as good, but helps out a little bit. But if you have something that does everything else, you might as well use that. Because yeah, the F-15, they weren't worried about radar cross section with that thing at all. It's a giant tennis court with the RCS of like a neighborhood.
Yep, for sure.
I have a quick question. If you could, and maybe you just maybe you just answered this question, but I'd rather ask anyways. If you could, Saint, what would be if you could like have any in BMS or DCS, but let's say BMS, if you could have a full fidelity aircraft implemented, like straight away, straight up, what would it be? Would it be the Raptor? We already have the F-16C. Would it be the Raptor? Or would it be something else?
That's actually a really interesting question. And it brings up one thing that I kind of don't like in BMS, which is the the sometimes the tendency to speculate on stuff that we just don't have the data on to really implement to a semi-realistic version, right? So I wouldn't want the F-35 or the F-22 or anything like that into BMS because I think it is going to take away from what BMS does great, which is that, you know, late 90s, early 2000s, middle 2000s, you know, where we have enough data that's out there that you can make some inferences on like how things perform and really kind of nail down that force packaging structure. So I would actually want something on like a EW type platform. Like I know it's not fully the data's not out there in like a Growler, but some sort of Growler-esque system where now you have like, okay, we've got the great Vipers, we've got the Eagles doing air-to-air, the Vipers doing strike. Now, if BMS had a way to impact like a red air picture with like EW or like offensive EA or anything like that, you know, if that was implemented into BMS, I think that's like another aspect that would just add to the total force packaging. We've already got, you know, some amazing C2 utilities out there. So you've got like essentially live AWACS, you know, the strike things there. I think the EW is really where we're missing out on. So that would be my desire.
So an EW platform makes sense.
I can see that because it is something. Because now we get updates. We have the SA-20 and 4.388 now. Like, what are we gonna do with SA-20? It could shoot at 100 miles. Like, what do you want from me? Like, you need some
Yeah, even if you
sort
got
of
like an
thing, like something.
EA6B or something
Yeah,
that like there was some sort of coded in there for like offensive EA against a SAM system or against a red air threat where now you degrade them. Like that just opens up the tactical, you know, scenarios so much because now you plan, all right, hey man, I need you to be in this position, you know, cannoning this SA-20 at this time or, you know, on demand or is it just it opens up that like mission planning scenario just full bore if you get that in there.
yeah. Adds another dimension of mission planning because EW is not something that. So we can put the AI in there, and it's really basic. They have to be in the area to be able to affect the SAMs. Essentially, they just turn off or don't work. So there's definitely would be a more mission planning in there, especially in these large campaigns with 30 something people. Would definitely be a nice characteristic of mission planning. Well, I do want to thank you for coming over to the podcast. I do appreciate the conversations. We all love aviation, and I really do appreciate you taking the time out to come and talk to us. And
It's been a
yeah,
pleasure.
really do appreciate it. It's really good. Biscuits, do you have anything else for the viewers?
No, nothing more. Just wanted to yeah, thank again Saint for coming on. It was great having him on. We had I think a really good conversation. Learned a lot about the F-15, which I don't know a lot of, despite people always telling me I need to try it on BMS. I just
Yeah,
can't.
you need to try
I
it in
just
Get you
can't.
up
BMS.
there. Let's get you in there.
Huh?
Yeah, you need to try it in BMS.
I know. I just don't have, I haven't had the time and opportunity, but one day I will try
And
to wrap my mind around it.
it's definitely different. I do recommend getting in to a scenario with someone else in a training environment with no threats, just literally flying around, getting used to the airplane. That's definitely needs to be a thing.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, it was great. I enjoyed this episode, and I hope the listeners did too. And I'll see you all on the next one.
Yep, I'll see you.
Yeah, just a real quick shout out to you guys for keeping everybody engaged in the community, and then also because I didn't mention it, the devs that are working on BMS as a whole, as well as specifically some of the F-15C devs who they know who they are. Just amazing work, and those guys are super passionate, and it's really exciting to see. But thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's fun.
Absolutely. So you